In a pathetic display of electoral affirmative action for their unpopular party, Alabama Republicans have flagrantly defied a Supreme Court order to fairly draw voting maps for their black constituents. Intrigued? Then click that like, subscribe, and the alert bell, and maybe check out my Patreon and enjoy the video. All right, folks, it seems obvious that the Republican Party of Alabama is determined to prove to not only their own constituents, but the country as a whole, that they don't believe that their political party can win elections, can win political fights without rigging the rules of the game in their favor. And we've talked about that before on this channel. Multiple Republican officials have stated for years, and the facts kind of support it, that the Republican Party doesn't believe that they can win if eligible voter turnout is maximized in this country. If we make it easier and more convenient for eligible voters to come out and vote or to apply their vote via absentee or mail-in ballot, then Republicans feel that they will never win elections. And rather than moderate their rhetoric, moderate their policy, or both, they instead run as far right as possible to appeal to their fringe base, their radical base, the MAGA base, and simultaneously work aggressively to exacerbate the numerous institutional advantages that they enjoy, which keeps them competitive with Democrats. And if you have any doubt about that, look no further than this story here about the voting maps in Alabama. I'm going to let Simone Sanders, who is a former Bernie Sanders spokesperson, I think she was the press secretary for his campaign in 2016, and MSNBC host, let her take it from here.
Last month, the Supreme Court handed down a surprise victory upholding Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. Now, Section 2 prohibits any voting law or practice from abridging any citizen's right to vote on the basis of race or color. Well, the Supreme Court's ruling upheld a lower court's ruling that Alabama violated Section 2 of that Voting Rights Act by packing all of the state's black voters into just one congressional district. The Supreme Court ruling ordered Alabama to redraw its maps to include a second majority black district.
All right, folks, so let's just stop right there and let's unpack this. Consider that the current United States Supreme Court is comprised of a 6-3 regressively conservative supermajority. And even they said, guys, Alabama, your voting maps are so racially and partisanly gerrymandered, even we can't ignore it, trying to corral all your black voters into a single district so as to entrench and exacerbate your partisan advantage. You can't do that. And so they affirmed a lower court ruling saying that you need to redraw the maps, and there has to be at least 2 districts which are majority black in terms of voters. And so we'll just continue.
But the Alabama state legislature seems determined not to comply. According to the Democracy Docket, there are currently more than 30 Section 2 cases being litigated across the country. Okay, and the Cook Political Report, it has already shifted 4 races from solid R to toss-up after the Supreme Court decision.
So again, think about that here. The Supreme Court has ruled in such a way that if states were to comply with even this regressively conservative Supreme Court, it would take multiple states out of firmly R into toss-up. That can't be overstated. And again, to any conservative or right-leaning moderate watching, understand that they're not ruling against, that doesn't mean that Republicans won't be competitive. It just means that the states will be competitive. They still stand a chance if, again, they moderate their rhetoric, if they moderate their policies, if they actually make a good faith effort to win over hearts and minds. They're still competitive in so many of these states. But even this Supreme Court says in so many instances Republicans are bending over backwards to racially and partisanly gerrymander their way into a legislative majority. It's bad faith and disgusting, even to this Supreme Court. Let's continue.
So here is what Democratic Congresswoman Terry Sewell, who represents Alabama's only majority black district, told me after the Supreme Court weighed in.
The results of elections could be changed by this, but we must remember this is not about Democrats and Republicans. This is about minority representation, fair representation.
And that's a fair point. You know, as a a white guy who just kind of is obsessed with partisan politics and electoral politics, it's easy to forget that even besides those implications, this is actually just a textbook case of racism coming from the Alabama Republicans, right? So even on its own merits, just on a racial issue, there is no justification for what the Republicans in Alabama are trying to do here. Continue.
But the state government in Alabama, it doesn't seem interested in fair representation. Yesterday afternoon, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed a new map into law, one that does not include a second black district.
By the way, Kay Ivey is one of the worst Republican governors in the country, and that's saying something when you have the likes of Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott also as Republican governors in this country.
According to Alabama House Speaker Nathan Ledbetter, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, of the United States House of Representatives, well, he actually reached out as the maps were being redrawn, and he expressed concerns about control of the House in 2024. Think about that, folks. As Republicans keep pushing conspiracy theories about the 2020 election being rigged against Republicans, some of them are actively working to dilute Black voting power in Alabama and beyond.
So that's a great point by Simone there. So the fact that Kevin McCarthy, who's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, felt that in the aftermath of this Supreme Court ruling that he had to weigh in while Alabama was redrawing the maps, because again, this will have an implication on the composition of the federal House of Representatives. That's despicable. It's a disturbing display of double standards. Republicans are claiming that elections are rigged in their favor if eligible voter turnout is maximized. Basically, if you make it easy and convenient for eligible voters to turn out and vote, that's rigging the game in favor of Democrats, because to them, the fact that they're less popular than Democrats and making it so that more people can vote, that's rigging the game of politics and rigging elections in Democrats' favor, even though it's not. You're just not as popular. But Kevin McCarthy trying to pressure Alabama Republicans to draw the maps in a way which defies a Supreme Court order and entrenches a Republican advantage, because not doing so would compromise the Republican majority in the House of Representatives, that's not rigging the game in their favor? Interesting, isn't it? I want to point out this tweet here from Mark Elias, who is an elections lawyer. He and his firm are committed to prosecuting cases against racially and partisanly gerrymandered voting maps in this country, and they are remarkably successful in doing so. His litigation success rate is incredible. He points out that this map that was signed into law by Governor Ivey in Alabama, it defies the Supreme Court pretty flagrantly. So they were ordered to draw 2 districts in which Black voters either comprise a voting age majority or something very close. And what they did instead was draw 1 district in which Black voters comprise a 50.65% majority, this blue district here, and this other one right here, not even 40%, 39.93%. This doesn't come close to complying with the Supreme Court order. The other thing I want to point out, Kay Ivey's remarks to this effect. So after she signed the law, that voting map into law, she issued a statement. The legislature knows our state, our people, and our districts better than the federal courts or activist groups, and I am pleased that they answered the call, remain focused, and produce new districts ahead of the court deadline. So I just want to be clear here. The Republican Party in Alabama has flagrantly defied a Supreme Court ruling by not drawing 2 districts, or something close to it, where Black voters are in the majority. That's a flagrant violation. And here's the other interesting point. We hear from the Republican Party all the time that the Supreme Court, because of course there's a regressively conservative supermajority, the Supreme Court's authority and integrity are beyond reproach. You shouldn't criticize, you shouldn't threaten to defy or change the composition of the Supreme Court. What the Supreme Court says goes, and anything to the contrary is unpatriotic. Except in this case, apparently, because now Republicans are choosing to defy a Supreme Court order. And so that begs the question. If Republicans can defy a Supreme Court order for racist or cynical partisan reasons, then why can't Democrats, and why shouldn't Democrats defy Supreme Court orders for much more righteous reasons than that? Food for thought.